for the refugee
do
program.
They have a right to be here?
Well, I mean, if they're admitted as a refugee
do they have a
and they
right?
haven't committed a crime.
Is there a right in the Constitution that says these refugees have a right to come into our country, our homeland? The answer is no.
We're the United States of America.
Yeah.
We welcome all immigrants.
No, we don't.
Welcome all immigrants.
The first order of government is the protection of its citizens. You saw it here first. Fireworks on justice last night during a heated debate over the Obama administration's Syrian refugee program. I haven't changed my mind, but let's see what my next guest has to say. Former administration aide to President Bill Clinton, Democratic strategist David Goodfriend joins me now. Good evening, David.
Thanks for having me on again, Judge. It's a pleasure.
Good to have you here. Why is the president so invested in this refugee program that he sends his chief of staff, McDonough, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, to convince Democrats to vote against the HALT Syrian refugee bill? And then 47 Democrats vote for the bill, including some of the most liberal Democrats in the House. Why is he so invested in this?
Well, it's an emotional issue. I think your segment from last night shows that, and there are good-hearted people on both sides of this issue. So don't expect me to vilify people who voted against the president. They had their reasons. I think that if you want to roll the clock back a little bit to when Pope Francis was here in the United States, and then a little bit after that to when the Evangelical Christian Leadership Council voiced its support for accepting refugees, because in their words, this is the lesson of the Good Samaritan when Jesus taught us all a lesson. That's really where the impetus came from. This is prior to the Paris attacks. And I think that there's still a fair amount of support as a moral issue, given the fact that these are refugees fleeing ISIS for all the reasons that we now understand.
But can you understand, David, that the concern of ordinary Americans is,
Sure.
and I just had the former assistant director of the FBI saying there is no database to match these people to. They can say they're Mohammed Jones, but nobody knows that they are. Can you understand that?
Let me tell you how much I can understand that. Every morning, I get on the subway with my son here in Washington, D.C., and I drop him off at his stop for school, and then I keep going on the subway to my office every morning. If you don't think that I consider terrorist threats during those subway rides, you're crazy. Of course I do, and so do millions of other Americans around the country. So, again, I am not going to vilify somebody for being afraid. Here's where I think, if I may, Judge,
go ahead.
Here's where I think we ought to all come together. This should be about rational safety and beating our real enemy here. Our real enemy is the terrorist, is the terrorist organization, is ISIS. And what do they want, right? They want to instill in us absolutely irrational fear. That's what they want, and I refuse to let them win. So what I want to hear is from leaders, real leaders. I'm talking about Senator Bob Corker, the Republican from Tennessee who chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, or Senator Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. What do they say? Well, they say, if I may, that refugees are not the big issue here. There's a whole other set of threats that are much more immediate that we should be focusing on. Now, I listen to that because instead of trying to score political points and who's up and who's down, they're talking about safety now.
David, with all due respect, nobody's trying to score points. They want to keep Americans safe. And if the terrorists are
You don't think Donald Trump is trying to score points?
Let me tell you, he's running for president just like Hillary Clinton is, saying there should be a no-fly zone over Syria when she never said it before.
So let's not talk about them.
But isn't that the point? Isn't that what the president wants? Us to focus on something other than, aren't we fighting ISIS and finishing them off? Why is the president saying we're winning the day before the Paris attacks? Why is John Kerry saying, you know, America's winning and ISIS is losing and ISIS is contained? Why? I don't want to talk about the refugees. I want to talk about the war. But what they're doing is they're focusing us on things that are not as important as winning the war.
Well, Judge, I don't have enough time on this segment to go into all the different ways in which this is extremely complicated, and it doesn't fit well with a soundbite. I can't spit out an answer for you. I'm not going to sit here and defend the words of the president or John Kerry or Donald Trump or anybody else. What I do understand is this. The United States, for decades, going back to the Reagan administration, has worked with supporting Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia, which has training camps for radical Islamic
What's that got to do with
sects.
this? So
I'll tell you what's got to do with this.
It's a
Well, let me answer.
complicated world. I want to protect Americans. And
Sure,
if
so
I don't
why-
know who's coming in, I don't want them in.
So why are we still supporting the country in the Middle East that is doing the most to fuel
I'm not
these
supporting
extremists?
them. I'm just telling you what I think. You know
Oh,
what?
well.
Ask your president, our president, why. David, good friend.
Right.
Thanks.
Well, I'm sorry. Did you want me to answer that, or are we saying
quickly.
goodbye?
We're out of time, but go ahead, quickly.
Okay, look. We're not going to be able to answer this in a 30-second soundbite, and the presidential candidates who are trying to still fear for their own political advantage should be ashamed of themselves.
You know
on
what? That's
all
not what it is.
sides.
I didn't even ask you about them. I'm asking you
I'm
about
gonna tell you.
Americans. But, David, thank you. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
with us. Next, where do these terrorists get their millions? And how do we stop the flow? I talk live with a top terror expert from the U.S. Treasury Department, and we're following the money trail. Don't go away.